Daniel Mercer never expected betrayal to arrive in the form of a black envelope. Inside was not an invitation to his daughter's wedding, but a demand for $120,000 to fund her lavish celebration and exotic honeymoon. Even more shocking was the cold note that banished him from attending while mocking him to be grateful for the chance to contribute. But Daniel sensed something darker at play behind the arrogance, and his search for the truth revealed a web of lies, fraud, and manipulation surrounding his daughter's fiancé. What began as heartbreak soon transformed into a battle of wits that exposed secrets, destroyed reputations, and left everyone questioning loyalty and trust. If you enjoy stories filled with twists and betrayal, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let me take you back to the moment when Daniel's world turned upside down, and the real story began. Daniel Mercer sat alone at his weathered oak table staring at the sea through his kitchen window. The waves outside rolled in slow and steady, their rhythm calming against the storm that brewed in his chest. For years this coastal town had been his refuge, a place where silence felt like a companion rather than a punishment. But that morning silence had been shattered by the knock at his door. When he opened it, no one was there. Only a single black envelope rested on the porch, gleaming faintly in the morning light, as though it had been waiting for him all along. He bent down and picked it up. The envelope was heavier than expected, its texture rough and unfamiliar beneath his fingertips. His name was written across the front in bold, deliberate strokes. Daniel Mercer, no return address. No clue of who had delivered it. He carried it inside, closed the door gently, and set it down on the table before him. For several long minutes he just stared, his breath rising and falling, the sound of the ocean faint through the glass. Finally he tore the envelope open. A folded document slipped out, along with a smaller note scrawled in a rushed hand. The document was thick printed on embossed paper, lined with crisp tables and official seals. At the top in gold letters it read "Wedding Invoice." Daniel's eyes narrowed as he scanned the list. The numbers climbed like jagged cliffs. Venue Mediterranean Villa, $60,000. Catering imported wines and seafood, $25,000. Honeymoon Dubai Luxury Suite, $20,000. Other expenses, staff flowers, yacht rental, $15,000. The total stood boldly at the bottom. $120,000. Daniel's chest tightened. His fingers traced the ink, hoping he had read it wrong. He turned to the note, and his blood ran colder still. Be grateful we allowed you to contribute. Your absence will make the event easier for everyone. There was no signature, but Daniel knew the handwriting instantly. Claire, his daughter. The words pressed into him like a knife. Not an invitation, not even a kind acknowledgement of his role in her life, but a demand and a banishment in the same breath. He leaned back in his chair, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. He closed his eyes and tried to steady his breathing, but the storm within only grew louder. Images flashed through his mind. Claire at 6 years old, running barefoot on the beach, laughing as she clutched his hand. Claire at 10, curled in his lap after nightmares, whispering that she never wanted to lose him. Claire at 16, angry and distant, accusing him of holding her back, of keeping her small when the world outside promised so much more. He remembered those arguments, how her resentment deepened after the accident that claimed her mother's life. She had screamed that it was his fault for not buying a newer car, for being cautious with money when safety should have come first. He remembered standing in the doorway of her room that night, listening as she wept into her pillow, powerless to comfort her anymore. And now this. A final wound. A bill instead of a welcome. Daniel rose to his feet and paced the room. The envelope still lay on the table, its black paper stark against the wood. He wanted to rip it to shreds, to throw it into the fire, but something stopped him. He studied it again and realized there was more to it than insult. There was arrogance, yes, but also a pattern, a rhythm in the numbers that gnawed at his instincts. He had spent decades as an architect, a man trained to see structure, to spot when lines did not align. And here the lines did not align. Why funnel payments through 3 separate companies? Why list expenses that doubled the market cost? Why the insistence that he pay all of it when Adrian Holt, Claire's fiancé, paraded himself online as a wealthy entrepreneur? Daniel's pulse quickened. This was not just cruelty, it was something deeper, something rotten. He carried the papers into his study, a room lined with shelves of books and sketches from projects long past. Dust motes floated in the light that streamed through the window, settling on the drafting table where he once spent nights drawing blueprints. He spread the invoice across the wood and reached for a pencil. Old habits resurfaced. He circled numbers, drew arrows, underlined inconsistencies. The further he went, the clearer it became. The invoice was not only inflated, but riddled with signs of manipulation. Adrian's fingerprints were all over it. Daniel leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Adrian. From the first day he had met the man, something about him had seemed hollow. Charming, yes, with that polished smile and sharp suit, but beneath the surface was a restlessness, a hunger that never sat still. Adrian had made bold promises about the future, about investments and success, but when Daniel pressed for details, the answers shifted like sand. Claire had been captivated, swept away by his confidence, eager to escape the shadows of her modest upbringing. Adrian had given her what Daniel could not, the illusion of endless wealth. Now Daniel saw the truth. Adrian was not just ambitious, he was dangerous. And this wedding was more than a celebration. It was a scheme. For hours Daniel sat at the table, piecing it together. He imagined the Mediterranean villa, grand and ostentatious, a backdrop for Adrian to impress investors and lure new backers. He pictured the yacht, the chandeliers, the imported delicacies, all a performance designed to sell a story of success. But none of it was real. Without the money, it would collapse like a stage set in the rain. And Adrian had chosen Daniel as his silent financier, knowing Claire's father would not risk public humiliation by refusing. But Adrian underestimated him. Daniel rose from the table, his jaw tight, his breath steady now. He would not fund this charade. He would not be used as a pawn in Adrian's game. Yet refusing was not enough. Something inside him, a quiet fire long buried, urged him to do more. To uncover the truth. To expose Adrian for what he was. The black envelope still sat on the table. Daniel picked it up, folded the note carefully, and slid it back inside. He placed it in a drawer, locking it away, not as evidence of defeat, but as a reminder of what had begun here today. Outside, the waves crashed harder against the shore. The wind picked up, rattling the window panes. Daniel stood by the glass, watching as the horizon darkened. A storm was brewing both in the sky and in his life. He could feel it pressing closer, heavy with the promise of upheaval. But he was no longer the broken man his daughter believed him to be. Years of solitude had hardened him, sharpened his patience. He had nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerous in his own way. That evening he sat down with a notebook and began to write. Names, numbers, suspicions, questions that demanded answers. Who were the companies behind these payments? Where did Adrian's money truly come from? What secrets lay hidden in the shadows of his empire? Daniel knew he could not do this alone. He would need help. Someone who knew how to dig deeper, someone who understood the language of secrets and lies. His mind turned to Marcus Flynn, Claire's childhood friend, the boy who once spent summers at their home, who had grown into a journalist with a reputation for uncovering what others wanted buried. It had been years since they spoke, but Daniel still remembered the loyalty in Marcus's eyes. The quiet way he had looked out for Claire even when she dismissed him. Perhaps Marcus still cared. Perhaps he would listen. Daniel closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair, the faintest flicker of determination lighting his features. The envelope had not broken him. It had awakened him. And now the path forward was clear. As night settled over the coastal town, Daniel sat in the dim glow of his lamp, waiting for the morning. The storm outside roared louder waves, battering the rocks with relentless force. Yet within that storm he felt a strange calm. He knew the next step would take him back into memories he had tried to bury, into wounds that never healed. And he knew the danger that awaited once he began digging into Adrian's world. Still, there was no turning back. And so, with the envelope locked away and the storm howling beyond the walls of his home, Daniel prepared to confront not only the deception in front of him, but the ghosts of the past that had shaped his fractured family. What he did not yet know was that this journey would unearth far more than fraud. It would tear open secrets long buried, reveal betrayals he never imagined, and test the fragile thread that still connected him to his daughter. The envelope was only the beginning. Daniel rose before dawn the next morning, though sleep had hardly touched him. The storm from the night before had left the beach scattered with seaweed and driftwood, as though the ocean itself had emptied its secrets upon the shore. He stood by the window with a mug of coffee steam curling into the cool air and let his mind drift back in time. The envelope had reopened wounds he had long tried to seal. If he was to face Adrian Holt, if he was to understand the grip this man held over his daughter, he had to reckon first with the past. It was impossible to think of Claire without remembering Emily, his wife. Emily had been the heart of their home, warm and radiant, a woman whose laughter filled every corner. She had died on a rain-slick road one autumn evening, her car spinning out on a bend she had driven 100 times before. The old sedan had no modern safety features, no airbags that could have softened the blow. The paramedics had told Daniel he had been lucky to even see her alive in the hospital. But luck had not been enough. Within hours she was gone. He could still recall Claire's face that night. 16 years old, trembling in shock, her eyes wide with grief that turned swiftly to anger. She had stared at him across the sterile hospital corridor, her voice sharp and brittle. If you had bought her a safer car, she would still be alive. Daniel had tried to explain the mortgage, the bills, the endless struggle to provide for both of them. He had worked late nights, sacrificed vacations, taken every measure he could to protect them. But Claire's pain had needed someone to blame, and he had been the nearest target. From that moment their bond had cracked. The laughter of her childhood gave way to silence at the dinner table, to slammed doors and long nights where she slipped out without a word. He had watched helplessly as resentment bloomed in her heart, a wall rising between them brick by brick. He tried to reach her, but every attempt seemed only to push her further away. Years passed, and Claire transformed. She became ambitious, restless, determined to escape the modest life Daniel had built for them. She excelled at school, but her success came with contempt for his caution, his frugality, his insistence on living within their means. She compared him to her friends' fathers, men with sleek cars, large houses, and effortless wealth. Daniel tried to be proud, but every compliment felt twisted into criticism, every achievement a reminder of what she believed he had denied her. Then Adrian Holt appeared. Daniel still remembered the first dinner Adrian attended at their home. He arrived in a tailored suit, his hair slicked back, his smile wide and rehearsed. He spoke with ease, tossing around phrases about investments, expansions, opportunities. Claire's eyes never left him glowing with admiration. When Adrian wrapped his arm around her shoulder and praised her as his partner in ambition, Daniel felt a chill. He had asked Adrian about his ventures, curious, cautious, but the answers had been vague stories layered with charm but hollow at their core. Claire brushed aside Daniel's doubts. She insisted Adrian was brilliant, that he was destined to build an empire. She accused her father of envy, of clinging to a small life while the world was offering her more. From that day forward, Adrian became the center of her universe. Daniel became little more than an obstacle. The black envelope had only confirmed what Daniel already knew in his heart. Claire was lost in Adrian's orbit, blinded by his promises, unwilling to see the shadows that clung to him. But what Daniel had not expected was the scale of Adrian's deception. The inflated invoice, the offshore accounts, the desperate push to extract money, these were not the marks of a successful entrepreneur. They were the marks of a man scrambling to maintain a facade. Daniel set his mug down and opened the drawer where the envelope lay. He spread the papers across the table again, his pencil tracing the lines of Adrian's schemes. But as he worked, his thoughts kept circling back to Claire. What had driven her to this point? Was it only grief, the bitterness that had festered since her mother's death? Or had Adrian planted seeds in her heart, nurturing her resentment until it grew into disdain? Daniel wanted to believe there was still a part of the girl who once ran laughing on the beach, who once whispered that she never wanted to lose him. But the words in the note, "Be grateful we allowed you," echoed like a verdict. He closed his eyes and let memory pull him deeper. He saw himself years ago working late in his studio while Claire studied at the kitchen table. She had always been bright, quick to learn, eager to ask questions about his blueprints. Sometimes she had sketched alongside him, her lines wobbly but full of imagination. For a while he had believed she might follow in his footsteps. But as she grew older, her sketches gave way to glossy magazines filled with exotic vacations and glittering jewelry. Her dreams shifted, and he could not follow. The day she introduced Adrian, he had seen the final door close between them. Adrian promised her everything Daniel could not, and Claire had chosen that promise over the steady love of her father. Yet even now, even after the cruel note, Daniel felt the old instinct to protect her. If Adrian's schemes unraveled, it would be Claire who suffered most. Her reputation, her trust, her heart, all would collapse with his lies. And despite everything, Daniel could not bear to watch his daughter fall. He ran his hand across the papers, the pencil marks, the evidence of Adrian's deceit. He knew he could not confront Adrian directly, not yet. Adrian was clever, calculating, skilled at twisting words. Daniel needed proof, something undeniable, and for that he needed help. Marcus Flynn. The name rose unbidden in his mind. Marcus had grown up alongside Claire, a boy with a quiet strength and a sharp mind. He had spent long afternoons in their home, helping Claire with school projects, listening when she was too angry to speak to her father. Daniel had always liked him, respected his determination. But when Adrian entered the picture, Marcus had faded from Claire's life, his warnings dismissed as jealousy. Now Marcus was a journalist known for exposing corruption in places most people dared not look. Daniel had read his articles, admired his courage from afar. If anyone could help him peel back Adrian's polished mask, it was Marcus. The thought brought Daniel a flicker of hope, but also unease. To reach out to Marcus meant stirring old memories, reopening wounds not only for himself but for his daughter. Claire had severed ties with Marcus years ago. Would she see his involvement as another betrayal? Would she despise her father even more if she discovered the alliance? Daniel stood and walked to the window. The morning tide was rising, crashing against the rocks with renewed force. The air smelled of salt and rain. He felt the weight of choice pressing down on him. He could remain silent, pay the money, and let the facade continue. Or he could act, risking what little bond remained with Claire in order to protect her from a greater fall. His hand clenched into a fist. Silence had never saved anyone. It had not saved Emily on that rainy road. It had not saved Claire from the bitterness that had consumed her. It would not save her now. Daniel turned from the window and reached for his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen, searching Marcus's number. He hesitated, his heart pounding. Once he made this call, there would be no turning back. The black envelope lay on the table, its presence, like a shadow in the room. Daniel glanced at it one final time, then drew a deep breath and pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. And as Marcus Flynn's voice answered on the other end, calm and steady, Daniel knew that the past he had long buried was about to rise again, and that the truth about Adrian Holt was far darker than he had ever imagined. Daniel's conversation with Marcus lingered in his mind long after the call ended. The journalist's voice had been calm, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much already. Marcus had not been surprised when Daniel spoke Adrian Holt's name. In fact, he had gone quiet for a long moment, as though recalling a file tucked away in the back of his mind, something he had hoped would not resurface. Then he had said, "You're right to be cautious. There are things you should know." It was those words that kept Daniel awake through the night. He sat at his desk with the black envelope spread before him, pencil marks and annotations scattered across the page. The rain outside tapped against the glass, steady, insistent, like the rhythm of an approaching march. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the pulse of something he had almost forgotten purpose. When morning arrived, he rose without hesitation. He showered, dressed in a pressed shirt, though he had no visitors to impress, and returned to the study. The space had once been his creative haven, a room where ideas came to life on paper. Now it was transforming into something else, a war room. He pinned the invoice to a corkboard, connecting lines between the inflated expenses. Yacht rental, $30,000. Catering triple the usual cost. Flowers shipped from distant countries at exorbitant prices. He circled the names of the companies listed on the documents, then drew arrows linking them to suspicious offshore accounts Marcus had hinted at. One by one the pieces formed a web, not of luxury but of deceit. The more he studied, the more convinced he became that Adrian's empire was nothing but smoke and mirrors. Every detail screamed of desperation, of a man juggling illusions and hoping no one looked too closely. But Daniel was looking, and he intended to follow every thread until the truth stood naked in the light. By midday he picked up the phone again. Marcus answered quickly, this time his tone sharper. I did some digging after our call. Adrian's name is tied to at least 3 shell companies based out of Monaco and the Cayman Islands. They've been shifting money between them for years. On paper, it looks impressive. Investment portfolios, real estate, luxury imports, but dig deeper and the numbers don't hold. He's covering losses with borrowed money, Daniel. He's been keeping the house of cards upright by luring in new investors. This wedding might be his biggest performance yet. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. And my daughter is standing center stage. I'm afraid so, Marcus said softly. The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel imagined Claire's face, her radiant smile, her belief in Adrian's promises. He imagined her standing beside him at the Mediterranean villa, unaware that she was part of a show designed to lure more victims. The thought was unbearable. What do you need from me? Daniel asked finally. Proof, Marcus replied. If we can document the inconsistencies, show where the money is going, we can dismantle him. But it will take more than financial records. We'll need voices, people he has burned before. Daniel nodded, though Marcus could not see him. Tell me where to start. For the next hour, Marcus guided him, outlining names of former partners and investors, people who had once believed in Adrian but walked away ruined. Some were local, others scattered across the country. Daniel wrote each name carefully in his notebook, the letters sharp and deliberate. These names were not just contacts, they were survivors of Adrian's schemes, and perhaps the key to saving his daughter. When the call ended, Daniel closed the notebook and leaned back. He felt the weight of years pressing down memories of projects left unfinished, of nights spent drowning in grief. But now he was sharpening again. Each note, each line was like drawing a new blueprint, not for a building, but for justice. He stepped outside to breathe in the salt air. The storm had passed, leaving the sky washed clean and bright. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp against the wind. He walked down the beach, his shoes crunching against wet sand, and let his thoughts race ahead. The old Daniel, the one who had retreated after Emily's death, would have surrendered. He would have paid the money, swallowed the humiliation, and let the charade continue. But that man was gone. This time he would not bend. As he walked, he rehearsed what lay ahead. He would contact the vendors first, the event planner, the catering companies, the villa staff. He would confirm their contracts, find out how much had been paid, and how much was still pending. If Adrian had inflated the figures, they would know. And with Marcus's help, he could begin pulling the mask away. Yet even as he planned, a shadow lingered. Adrian was not foolish. He was cunning, manipulative, skilled at twisting every situation to his advantage. If Daniel moved too quickly, Adrian might sense it. He could tighten his grip on Claire, turning her further against her father. The risk was real, but the alternative silence was far worse. That evening, Daniel placed his first call. The line rang before a clipped voice answered. Mark Brennan, event planner. Daniel introduced himself, his tone steady. I am Daniel Mercer. My daughter's wedding is scheduled at the Mediterranean villa. I received the invoice. I wanted to clarify a few things. There was a pause, then a polite but cautious reply. Of course, Mr. Mercer. I can provide details. As Mark spoke, Daniel scribbled notes. The figures he heard did not match those on the invoice. The venue cost was lower, the catering fees more reasonable, the flowers sourced locally rather than imported. Line by line, the truth emerged. Adrian had doubled, even tripled the numbers before sending them to Daniel. The demand for $120,000 was not only arrogant, it was a lie. Daniel thanked Mark and ended the call. He sat back in his chair, the evidence solidifying in his hands. Adrian had crossed a line. It was no longer about entitlement or arrogance. It was theft, plain and calculated. His pulse quickened. The anger that had burned quietly within him now roared to life. He would not simply refuse the payment. He would dismantle Adrian's scheme piece by piece until there was nothing left. And when Adrian's empire collapsed, Claire would see the truth with her own eyes. Night fell quickly, the coastal wind rattling the shutters. Daniel sat at his desk, the invoice pinned before him, the notebook open at his side. He traced the names Marcus had given him, planning his next moves. Each name was a door leading deeper into Adrian's world, and he would open them one by one. Yet in the quiet of that room, he also felt the weight of risk. Adrian would not stand idly by. He would fight to protect his facade, and Daniel knew men like him could be dangerous when cornered. This was no simple family dispute. It was a battle against a man whose life was built on lies, a man with everything to lose. Daniel extinguished the lamp and sat in darkness, the sound of waves pounding against the shore. He thought of Emily, of the life they had once dreamed of, simple and honest. He thought of Claire, the little girl who once held his hand and promised she would always need him. And he thought of Adrian, the man who had stolen her trust, twisting it into something unrecognizable. A dangerous resolve settled in his chest. He would not rest until the truth was exposed, no matter the cost. But Daniel did not yet realize that his first step had already set wheels in motion. The vendors would talk, rumors would spread, and Adrian Holt, ever alert to threats, would soon realize someone was pulling at the threads of his carefully woven mask. The game had begun. The next morning arrived with an eerie stillness. The ocean, usually Daniel's metronome, seemed quieter than usual, as though the tide itself was holding its breath. He sat at his kitchen table with the phone in his hand, staring at the number Marcus had given him the night before. He knew what he had to do, but the weight of it pressed down heavily. Contacting Marcus again meant crossing a line he could never retreat from. Finally, with a steadying breath, he pressed call. The line rang twice before a voice answered. Flynn, Marcus, it's Daniel Mercer. There was a pause, then the low hum of recognition. I figured you'd call again. Did you find what you were looking for? Daniel leaned back, glancing at the corkboard pinned with documents. I spoke to the event planner. The numbers don't add up. Adrian doctored the invoice, inflated everything. He expected me to pay for the illusion. Marcus gave a short, bitter laugh. That sounds like him. Always building castles out of smoke. Then you've crossed paths before. Not directly, Marcus admitted. But I have followed his trail. He's clever. Keeps his hands clean while others take the fall. It's why he's never been exposed. People are too scared or too ashamed to speak up. Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. I am not ashamed, and I am not scared. The silence that followed was broken by Marcus's steady voice. Good. Then maybe we can do this together. That was how the alliance began. Not with a contract or a promise, but with two men bound by loyalty to a daughter who had lost her way and by hatred of a man who thrived on deception. Marcus arrived at Daniel's home 2 days later. He had aged since Daniel had last seen him, his dark hair now streaked with gray, his expression sharper, harder. But his eyes carried the same quiet intensity Daniel remembered from years ago when Marcus had been just a boy sitting at their table sharing meals and laughter with Claire. You haven't changed much, Daniel said as he opened the door. Neither have you, Marcus replied, though his tone was more somber. They sat together in the study papers spread across the desk, the invoice pinned like evidence in a courtroom. Marcus examined it carefully, nodding at Daniel's notes, then pulling a small recorder from his bag. This, Marcus said, placing it on the desk, will be our strongest weapon. Adrian thrives on charm, on saying one thing in private and another in public. If we catch him in his lies, we can dismantle his mask. Daniel studied the device. And if he suspects we're listening, Marcus gave a faint smile. Then we'll make him talk when he thinks no one else is listening. They began piecing together a plan. Marcus would use his connections to contact former business associates of Adrian, people who had been ruined by his schemes. Daniel would continue speaking with vendors and planners, quietly gathering discrepancies. Between them, they would build a case not in court, but in the court of perception. Adrian's carefully crafted facade depended on admiration, on the illusion of success. If that illusion cracked, everything else would collapse. As they worked, Daniel found himself watching Marcus more closely. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet resolve forged by years of chasing stories others were too afraid to write. Yet beneath that calm exterior, Daniel sensed something more personal. Marcus still cared for Claire. It was evident in the way his voice softened when he spoke her name, and the way his eyes lingered on her photograph still scattered through the house. "You still think of her," Daniel said quietly. Marcus looked up, startled, then nodded. "She was my friend, my best friend, and I hated watching her drift away. But Adrian, he had a way of making her believe she was the only one who mattered. I could not compete with that." Daniel sighed. Neither could I. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with memories of what once was. Then Marcus leaned forward. "But we can bring her back. Maybe not to who she was before, but back to the truth. We can free her from him." The words struck something deep in Daniel. For years he had believed his daughter lost to him, her loyalty stolen, her love poisoned by resentment. But Marcus spoke with conviction, as if the bond was not yet broken beyond repair. And for the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to hope. Days passed in a blur of activity. Daniel made discreet calls, always careful to hide his intent. Marcus traveled, meeting with contacts in quiet cafes and dimly lit offices, recording every testimony he could gather. Stories emerged of Adrian's betrayal, investments, siphoned partnerships, destroyed lives left in ruins while he moved on unscathed. One evening, Marcus returned with a small folder of photographs. He spread them across the table, images of documents, contracts signed, and abandoned bank transfers that vanished into offshore accounts. Each photo was a piece of the puzzle fragments of Adrian's deception. "Look here," Marcus said, pointing to one. "This was a property deal in Spain. He promised investors luxury villas, took their money. Nothing was ever built. The land still sits empty." Daniel stared at the photo, his anger deepening. And no one stopped him, not enough proof. Too many people embarrassed to admit they had been fooled. That's how men like him survive. Daniel clenched his fists. "Then we will give them the proof." But proof was not the only weapon they would need. Adrian's strength was not only in lies, but in control. He had Claire under his spell, and through her he could twist any accusation into a father's bitterness. If Daniel wanted to reach her, he would need to show her Adrian's true face, not tell her. That was when Marcus suggested the recordings. "Catch him boasting," Marcus said. "He will slip. Men like him always do. If we can get him comfortable, maybe with investors or vendors, he will brag. And when he does, we will have it on record." Daniel hesitated. The thought of spying on his own daughter's fiancé, of planting devices and lurking in shadows, unsettled him. But then he remembered the note, the demand, the cold words that dismissed him as nothing more than a wallet. He remembered Emily and the promise he had once made to keep their daughter safe. He nodded. "Do it." They placed the first recorder in a meeting Adrian had scheduled with the villa's florist. Marcus, using a trusted contact, arranged for the device to be hidden among the arrangements. Hours later, they listened as Adrian's voice filled the room. "She thinks it's all for her," he said, his tone laced with mockery. "The villa, the flowers, the imported champagne. She believes she deserves it, and I let her believe. But the truth is, simple appearances matter. Once the investors see me command a wedding like this, they will beg to buy in. And the old man Claire's father, he is footing the bill. He doesn't even know he's building my future. The words burned into Daniel's chest. He sat rigid as the recording ended, his hands trembling with rage. Marcus reached across the table and placed a hand on his arm. This is what we needed. The mask is slipping. Daniel exhaled slowly. It is not enough. I want more. I want him stripped bare, every lie exposed. Marcus nodded. Then we keep digging. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters once more. The storm was returning, and with it the weight of the battle they had chosen. Daniel knew the road ahead would be dangerous. Adrian was not a man who forgave betrayal, and soon he would sense the ground shifting beneath him. But Daniel no longer felt alone. Marcus's presence was a reminder that loyalty still existed, that not all ties had been broken. Together they were pulling threads, and already the fabric of Adrian's world was beginning to fray. As Daniel extinguished the lamp and prepared for another sleepless night, he knew the next move would bring them closer to confrontation. Adrian would not remain blind forever. The closer they came to the truth, the more dangerous he would become. The silent conspiracy was no longer silent. It was alive, growing ready to strike. And somewhere in the shadows, Adrian Holt was about to realize that someone was watching him. The recording of Adrian's mocking words replayed in Daniel's mind for days. Each time he heard the laughter in that voice, the casual way Adrian reduced Claire to a pawn and Daniel to a wallet, the fire in his chest burned hotter. But anger alone would not undo what Adrian had built. He needed patience, precision, and proof so undeniable that even Claire could not look away. Marcus had said it best the night before as they sat in the dim glow of the study. We are not just tearing down a man, Daniel. We are tearing down an illusion. And illusions only break when you show the crowd what lies behind the curtain. The curtain was the wedding itself. Adrian's Mediterranean villa. The extravagant floral displays the imported wines and seafood. The yacht gleaming in the harbor, each piece was carefully chosen to project wealth, power, and inevitability. It was not just a wedding. It was a stage. Adrian was not marrying Claire Mercer. He was performing a role, and his audience was a group of potential investors eager to be dazzled. If the illusion cracked, if the performance faltered, the entire empire would tremble. Daniel began with the villa. He contacted the property manager directly under the pretense of clarifying the family's contribution. The man on the other end of the line sounded puzzled when Daniel asked about the cost. The booking fee is 20,000 euros, the manager explained, and the deposit was 5. But the rest remains unpaid. If we do not receive it soon, the reservation may be forfeited. Daniel's pencil froze mid-note. 20,000 euros, far less than the 60,000 listed on the invoice Adrian had sent. The deception deepened. He thanked the manager, hung up, and leaned back in his chair. Adrian had not just padded numbers. He had created a fantasy, a false world where money appeared endless, and Daniel's contribution was the final stone in the facade. Without it, the walls would collapse. Later that afternoon, Marcus returned with more evidence. He dropped a folder onto the desk, its contents spilling out bank statements, testimonies, photographs. Catering company, Marcus said, tapping one sheet. They were promised $25,000. But look here. The actual cost is less than half. Adrian inflated everything, siphoning off the difference. Daniel scanned the page, his jaw tightening. And the vendors, growing nervous. He has delayed deposits, promised payments that never came. Some are threatening to pull out. Daniel could almost see it in his mind, the grand event Adrian had promised Claire unraveling thread by thread. The chandeliers unlit the tables bare, the music silenced. An empire of illusions brought to its knees not by force but by truth. Yet he knew Adrian would not yield easily. A man who lived by deception would fight tooth and nail to preserve it. That was why Marcus urged caution. The moment he suspects we are behind this, he will tighten his grip on Claire. We need to keep pressing quietly, letting the cracks widen until the whole thing collapses on its own. Daniel agreed, but patience was never easy when the stakes were his daughter. He thought of Claire in her white gown, glowing with anticipation, never realizing the stage beneath her feet was built on sand. The following week, Daniel made another discreet call, this time to the company handling the flowers. The florist, a woman with a weary voice, confirmed what Marcus had warned. "We were promised $12,000. We delivered samples, began preparing shipments, but he has yet to pay the deposit. We cannot continue without it." 12,000. Adrian's invoice had demanded 25. Daniel thanked her and ended the call, his notes growing darker with every inconsistency. He pinned them to the corkboard, a collage of lies connected by string and ink. Each piece revealed the same pattern: grand promises, inflated costs, unpaid bills. Adrian's illusion was already crumbling. But as Daniel studied the board late into the night, a new fear settled over him. What if Claire discovered the cracks too late? What if the collapse came not as a revelation, but as a public humiliation, leaving her broken at the altar before the world? He rubbed his temples, weary from the weight of it. He wanted to save her from Adrian, but he also wanted to shield her from shame. It was a cruel balance, how to reveal the truth without destroying her spirit. Marcus offered little comfort. Sometimes people must be broken before they can see clearly. The danger lies not in humiliation, but in continuing the lie. Daniel knew he was right, but the father in him recoiled. Still he pressed forward. The cracks soon became impossible to ignore. Vendors whispered to one another. Rumors spread through town of unpaid deposits, of a groom who boasted wealth while leaving others in debt. Guests who had received their gilded invitations began to hear murmurs of uncertainty. The image of perfection Adrian had painted was blurring at the edges. One evening, Marcus played another recording. Adrian's voice filled the study once more, but this time it carried a note of frustration. "The florist is complaining. The villa wants their payment. Do they not understand who I am? They will be paid when I decide. If Mercer delivers his share, everything will move forward. Until then, they wait." The arrogance in those words confirmed everything Daniel had feared. Adrian was holding the wedding together with nothing but confidence and delay. And Daniel was meant to be the cornerstone of the illusion, but he would not be. Instead, he and Marcus began to turn the screws tighter. Marcus shared selective pieces of evidence with trusted contacts, nothing too bold, nothing that would reveal their hand, but enough to keep pressure mounting. A whispered document here, a photograph there. Slowly the rumors spread further, weaving their way into the very fabric of the event. By the second week of their work, Daniel noticed the change. Vendors called him directly, bypassing Adrian, seeking reassurance. Guests called with questions about cancellations. Even neighbors stopped him in town, lowering their voices to ask if the wedding was truly in jeopardy. The illusion was unraveling, and Adrian could no longer control the threads. But Daniel also knew the danger was rising. Men like Adrian did not crumble quietly. They lashed out, desperate to protect the world they had built. And if Adrian sensed Daniel's hand in the unraveling, the retaliation would be swift. Late one night, as Daniel sat in his study, the phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but the words chilled him to his core. "You think you are clever. Stay out of this, or you will regret it." Daniel read it twice, then handed the phone to Marcus, who had just returned from another meeting. Marcus studied the message, his expression unreadable. He knows someone is pulling at the threads. He does not know it is us yet, but he will find out soon enough. Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight pressing down heavier than before. The cracks were widening, the illusion unraveling, but the battle was only beginning. Adrian Holt was not just a fraud, he was a predator, and predators fought hardest when cornered. The sea outside roared, louder waves crashing against the rocks with relentless fury. Daniel stood by the window, watching the storm rise once more, and felt the inevitability of confrontation pressing closer. The illusion was breaking, but so too was the fragile calm that had protected them. Soon the pressure would explode. The first sign that Adrian was losing control came with the phone calls. At first they were polite, dripping with the syrup of false courtesy. Then they grew sharper, more insistent until they became a storm of ringing. Each call demanding answers Daniel had no intention of giving. It was Claire's voice that broke him most. She left voicemails in the late hours of the night, her tones swinging between pleading and fury. "Dad, why are you doing this? Adrian is under so much stress. We need you to come through. This is not just about money, it is about family. Do you not want me to be happy?" Another night, her words cracked with tears. "I know you do not like him, but can you not put that aside just this once? Why must you always make everything about control?" And then the sharpest blade of all. "Maybe Mom was right about you. Maybe you were never enough." The words dug into him like salt in an open wound. He had lived with guilt for years, guilt over the accident, guilt over choices that could not be undone. Hearing his daughter throw those doubts back at him left him trembling in the darkness of his study. But even in that pain, something steadier emerged. He recognized the echo of Adrian's voice in her words. Adrian had whispered poison into her heart, turning her grief into a weapon. Daniel would not let it destroy him now. Still the pressure mounted. Adrian's messages arrived daily, sometimes by text, sometimes in calls laced with thinly veiled threats. "You are making a fool of yourself, old man. Do you want your daughter humiliated in front of everyone? Pay your share, and this will all go away." Daniel ignored them, though his chest tightened with every word. He had faced arrogance before in clients and rivals, but never had he faced it from someone who held his daughter so firmly in their grasp. He kept the messages, saving each one like a shard of evidence, proof of Adrian's desperation. Meanwhile, Marcus reported that vendors were abandoning the wedding one by one. The florist had withdrawn completely. The catering company had halted preparations until deposits were received. Even the musicians had pulled out, citing uncertain arrangements. Each departure left Adrian scrambling, his once polished image fraying at the edges. Yet Claire clung harder. She called Daniel in anger one evening, her voice trembling. "Do you know how humiliating this is for me? Guests are whispering, vendors are backing out, and Adrian is trying to fix it all alone. And you sit there doing nothing. You are sabotaging me." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Claire, listen to me. This is not me sabotaging you. This is Adrian. He is lying to you. He inflated the costs, he is drowning in debts, and he is using you, using me to keep the show alive." But his words fell like stones into water. Claire laughed bitterly. "You are jealous. That is all this is. You cannot stand that he can give me the life you never could." The line went dead before Daniel could reply. For hours afterward, he sat in silence, staring at the photograph of Emily on the mantel. Her smile seemed to plead with him across the years. He whispered to her in the stillness, "I am trying. God knows I am trying." But she cannot see him yet. It was Marcus who grounded him again. "She will not believe you until the mask falls." And it will. Adrian is tightening the rope around his own neck. You just need to hold firm. But holding firm was harder each day. The community began to buzz with rumors. At the market, neighbors whispered about the collapsing wedding. Some pitied Daniel, others questioned whether he had turned his back on his only daughter. He felt the weight of their stares as he walked through town, but he kept his head high. He knew the truth, even if the world did not yet. The pressure peaked one stormy afternoon when Adrian himself appeared at Daniel's door. His tailored suit was damp from the rain, but his smile was as sharp as ever. "Mr. Mercer," he said smoothly, stepping across the threshold without invitation. "We need to talk." Daniel closed the door behind him, his heart steady but alert. "Say what you came to say." Adrian paced the study, his eyes flicking over the corkboard with its web of notes and strings. His smile faltered for a moment before he recovered. "You think you are clever gathering scraps of paper, making yourself feel important. But let me make this clear. You are playing a dangerous game. Claire will never forgive you if you ruin this wedding. Pay your share, and you can walk away with your dignity intact. Refuse, and you will lose her forever." Daniel studied him in silence, letting the words settle like ash. Then he stepped closer, his voice calm but cold. "I lost her the day she fell into your lies, but I will not lose myself, not again." For the first time, Adrian's eyes flickered with something beyond arrogance, wariness, perhaps even fear. He leaned in his voice low. "You do not know who you are dealing with." Daniel met his gaze without flinching. "No, Adrian. It is you who does not know who you are dealing with." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. He turned sharply, his footsteps echoing through the hall as he left. The slam of the door shook the walls, but Daniel stood firm, his breath steady. The visit left no doubt. Adrian knew the illusion was unraveling, and he was growing desperate. In the days that followed, the pressure intensified further. Claire's calls became frantic, her once defiant voice cracking with fear. Guests were canceling, whispers of scandal spreading fast. She begged Daniel to fix it, to send the money to save her from humiliation. Daniel listened in silence, his heart aching. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from pain, but protection now meant letting the collapse run its course. Only then would she see Adrian for who he truly was. Meanwhile, Marcus uncovered more damning evidence: audio recordings of Adrian mocking investors, photographs of forged contracts, testimonies from ruined partners. The case against him was growing stronger, but so too was the danger. One evening, as Daniel walked the quiet streets of town, he felt the hairs on his neck prickle. A figure lingered in the shadows across the road, watching him. When he turned, the figure melted into the darkness. He quickened, his pace, heart pounding. Adrian's threats echoed in his ears. "Dangerous game. You will regret it." By the time he reached home, he knew with certainty Adrian had realized someone was pulling the strings. And now he was watching. That night, Daniel sat with Marcus in the study, the storm raging outside once more. The corkboard glowed in the lamplight, covered in proof, every lie mapped out. The walls of Adrian's illusion were collapsing. But the closer they came to exposing him, the more perilous it became. Marcus looked up from the evidence, his eyes grave. "The wedding is days away." "This is it, Daniel. Either the truth breaks then, or it never will. But be ready, he will come at you with everything." Daniel nodded slowly, the fire in his chest steady and unyielding. Let him come. The waves outside roared, crashing against the rocks, as if the sea itself anticipated the storm to come. The pressure had reached its breaking point, and soon the day of reckoning would arrive. The wedding day arrived under a sky split by storm clouds. From the moment Daniel woke, he felt the weight of the day pressing against his chest like an anchor. Rain lashed against the windows, carried sideways by violent gusts that rattled the panes. The sea churned with whitecaps, the horizon swallowed in gray mist. It was as if nature itself had decided to strip the illusion bare. Daniel brewed a pot of coffee, but barely touched it. He sat in silence, the corkboard of evidence looming across the room. Strings stretched between papers, photographs, and names. A map of deceit now fully illuminated. He thought of Claire dressing in her gown, her hands trembling with excitement or dread, he could not know which. He thought of Adrian straightening his tie before a mirror, rehearsing the smile that had fooled so many. Marcus arrived just after sunrise, his coat drenched from the storm. He carried a small camera and a folder tucked under his arm. "It is happening already," he said, his voice low. "The vendors are walking out. Half the decorations have not arrived. The caterer has pulled everything. Guests are arriving to a villa that looks half-finished." Daniel closed his eyes, drawing in a deep breath. The moment he had both feared and waited for was here. And Adrian Marcus gave a grim smile, panicking, shouting at staff, making calls that no one answers. I caught him on tape yelling into his phone. He is cracking. Through the storm, Daniel could almost hear the chaos unraveling miles away. The villa, once envisioned as a palace of grandeur, stood now as a hollow shell. Rain seeped through half-finished canopies, flowers wilted before they were arranged, and guests huddled in confusion, their elegant attire damp from the storm. Marcus pulled a photograph from his folder and laid it on the table. Daniel stared at the image of Claire, her gown pristine but her expression shattered. She stood in the villa's entrance, mascara running down her cheeks, her bouquet clutched too tightly in trembling hands. Adrian stood beside her, his jaw clenched, his eyes wild with desperation. She begged the staff to stay, Marcus said softly, but no one would. The rumors spread too far, the debt's too high. Adrian's promises mean nothing now. Daniel's heart twisted. For years he had dreamed of seeing his daughter radiant on her wedding day, her smile wide, her joy unshakable. Instead, she stood in ruins, betrayed by the man she trusted most. He wanted to rush to her, to shield her from the whispers, to hold her as he had when she was a child. But he knew it was not yet time. Marcus set the camera on the desk. I recorded everything. The vendors leaving the guests, muttering, Adrian begging for money. This will end him. Daniel nodded, though his chest ached, and Claire Marcus hesitated. She still defends him. Even as the world falls apart, she clings to him. She told the guests her father sabotaged the wedding. The words struck like a blade. Daniel clenched his fists, fighting the urge to crumble. He had expected this Adrian, twisting the story, casting him as the villain. But hearing it aloud, knowing his daughter believed it cut deeper than any insult. Still he stayed resolute. When the lies fall, the truth will remain. She will see him for what he is. Hours dragged by as the storm raged. Daniel remained at his table. The evidence spread before him, his mind turning over every possibility. He imagined the villa growing darker as the day wore on, guests leaving in frustration, whispers swelling into scandal. He imagined Adrian pacing like a caged animal. Each failed phone call another brick crumbling from his fortress. By late afternoon, the inevitable came. A knock thundered at Daniel's door, sharp and frantic. He opened it to find Claire and Adrian standing in the rain, their clothes soaked, their faces pale with desperation. Claire's veil clung to her cheeks, her makeup streaked. Adrian's tie hung loose, his hair plastered to his forehead. Dad, Claire cried, her voice breaking. Please, you have to help us. Behind her, Adrian's eyes glared with fury, though his words came measured. This is your doing. You can fix it. Transfer the money, and the wedding can still be saved. Daniel stood in the doorway, the storm raging behind them, the warmth of his home behind him. For a moment he felt suspended between two worlds, the father desperate to protect his daughter and the man who had vowed never to be broken again. Claire stepped forward, grabbing his arm. Please, Dad. Everyone is leaving. They are laughing at us. You can make this right. He looked into her eyes, searching for the girl she had once been. For a heartbeat he thought he saw her, the child who had held his hand on the beach, the teenager who had cried in his arms after her mother's funeral. But then Adrian spoke and the vision shattered. Do it, old man, Adrian hissed, or watch your daughter live with the shame you caused. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked at Adrian, then at Claire, then back at the storm swirling outside. His voice was steady when he spoke. No, I will not save your lies. Claire's face crumpled, tears spilling anew. Adrian's fury blazed, but Daniel did not flinch. He stepped back, his hand on the door. Go, he said quietly. This house will not fund your deception. The door closed with a finality that echoed through the hall. Daniel leaned against it, his breath shuddering, his heart torn. Outside, the storm roared louder, rattling the windows, as if the world itself bore witness to the choice he had made. Through the wood of the door, he heard Claire's sobs fading into the rain, mingling with Adrian's sharp curses. He pressed his hand against the surface, wishing he could reach her, wishing she could see the truth without enduring the collapse. But he knew the moment was coming. The reckoning had begun. Marcus entered from the study, his expression solemn. You did the right thing. Daniel nodded, though the ache in his chest felt unbearable. It does not feel like it. Because you are a father, Marcus said softly. But sometimes love means letting the storm tear it all down. Only then will she see what was standing beside her all along. The storm raged deep into the night, the sea pounding the shore with relentless fury. Daniel sat in the dim light of his study, listening, waiting. He knew Adrian would not give up easily. The man had been cornered, humiliated, stripped of his power, and desperate men were dangerous. As lightning split the sky and thunder shook the walls, Daniel whispered to himself, to Emily, to the memory of the life they had once built. It is almost over. Hold her through this storm until she can see the truth. And though he did not yet know how he felt, the certainty settled in his bones. The confrontation was coming. Adrian Holt would not retreat quietly. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that would soon cross his threshold. The storm had not let up by the time darkness fell. The coastal town was swallowed by rain and wind, the streets slick with running water, the sky lit sporadically by jagged lightning. Daniel sat in his study with the lamp burning low, the corkboard of evidence looming above him like a judge. Each pin, each string, each document whispered the same truth. Adrian Holt was a fraud. Yet the truth alone could not sever the hold he had on Claire. That would take something more. The knock came again louder, this time rattling the door in its frame. Daniel rose slowly, his body heavy with dread, and opened it to find Claire and Adrian standing there once more. They were soaked from head to toe, their clothes clinging to their skin, their eyes wild from the storm and the humiliation of the day. "Dad, please," Claire said, her voice raw, her mascara streaked. "Do not do this to me. You can still fix it." Adrian pushed past her, stepping into the hall without waiting for permission. His shoes left muddy prints on the floor, his expression twisting between rage and desperation. "Enough of this game, Mercer. You will pay the money. Right now." Daniel closed the door behind them, his face calm but his heart pounding. "No," he said simply. Claire flinched at the word. "You do not understand, Dad. The guests are furious. People are already leaving. Adrian's investors are threatening to pull out. Do you know what that means for us?" "For you," Daniel corrected gently. "Not for me." Her face crumpled, but before she could speak, Adrian stepped forward, his eyes flashing. "You old fool. Do you want your daughter ruined? Do you want her to be the laughingstock of every whispering guest? All because you could not set aside your bitterness." Daniel studied him, unflinching. "You do not care about her reputation. You care about your own. This wedding was never about love. It was about spectacle, about making yourself look untouchable." Adrian's smile was sharp, predatory, and it would have worked if you had played your part. No one would have known. No one would have cared. But you had to interfere. Daniel walked to his desk, his steps measured, and picked up the small recorder Marcus had left. He pressed a button, and Adrian's voice filled the room, mocking, arrogant, undeniable. "She thinks it is all for her. But the truth is, simple appearances matter. Once the investors see me command a wedding like this, they will beg to buy in. And the old man, Claire's father, he is footing the bill." The recording ended the room, falling into tense silence. Claire's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice trembling. Adrian froze, then scoffed, forcing a laugh. "Do you not see? This is out of context. He set me up. He." But Claire's face had gone pale. "You said those words. That is your voice." Adrian turned to her, his hands reaching for her arms. "Listen to me, Claire. He is manipulating you. He has always manipulated you. He wants to keep you small, tied to his miserable little life. I am offering you everything. Do not let him take that away." She pulled back, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You used me. All this time you used me." Adrian's mask cracked, then his composure unraveling. His voice sharpened, his charm gone. "Of course I used you. Everyone is used by someone. That is how the world works. Do you think love puts food on the table? Do you think loyalty builds empires? No, power does, money does, and I am the one who knows how to take it." Daniel stepped closer, his voice steady. "And now you will lose it." Adrian turned on him, fury blazing. "You think this is over? Do you think exposing me here in this pathetic house means anything I will rebuild? I always do." Daniel met his gaze calmly. "Not this time. Marcus has everything, your recordings, your contracts, the testimonies of the people you ruined. By tomorrow morning, the world will know exactly who you are." For the first time, true fear flickered in Adrian's eyes. He realized the walls had closed in, that there was no stage left to perform on, no curtain to hide behind. His hand twitched as though he wanted to strike out, but he saw Daniel's unwavering stance and stopped himself. Claire sank into a chair, her face buried in her hand. The storm outside pounded harder thunder, shaking the windows, echoing the chaos in her heart. All of this, she whispered. Everything I believed, it was a lie. Daniel's chest ached at the sight of her broken and betrayed. He wanted to reach for her to gather her in his arms as he had when she was small, but he stayed still. This was her storm to weather. Adrian straightened his shoulders, forcing a sneer back onto his lips. You think you have won, Mercer, but ruin does not frighten me. I will walk out of here and I will build again. And when I do, you will wish you had taken the deal. Daniel's voice was quiet but resolute. Walk out then, but you will not take her with you. Adrian glanced at Claire, who sat trembling, unable to meet his eyes. He cursed under his breath, then stormed to the door. The slam reverberated through the house, shaking the walls as though the storm itself had entered. For a long while, only the rain filled the silence. Daniel finally turned to his daughter. Claire. She looked up at him, her eyes red, her voice breaking. I hated you for so long. I blamed you for everything. And now I do not know what to believe. Daniel's throat tightened. Believe this. I have always loved you. I have never stopped. She shook her head, fresh tears falling. I do not deserve it. Not after everything I said. Not after choosing him over you. He stepped closer, kneeling before her. You were hurting. He fed that hurt. But you are my daughter. Nothing changes that. For the first time in years, she let him touch her hand. It was a fragile connection, trembling but real, like the first light of dawn after a long storm. Marcus entered quietly, then carrying another folder. He set it on the desk without a word, but his eyes softened as he looked at Claire. He had seen the cracks in her armor too, and perhaps like Daniel, he saw hope glimmering beneath the ruin. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. What happens now? Daniel glanced at the folder, at the evidence, ready to shatter Adrian's last defenses. Now, he said, the truth comes out. But even as he spoke, he knew this was only the beginning. Adrian would not vanish quietly into the storm. Men like him never did. The next days would bring exposure, fallout, perhaps even danger. Yet Daniel also knew something had shifted. He was no longer fighting alone. The storm outside began to ease, the thunder rolling farther into the distance, but the storm within their lives was far from over. And as Daniel sat with his daughter in the dim glow of the lamp, he realized the hardest part was yet to come, rebuilding from the wreckage Adrian had left behind. The morning after the confrontation was strangely calm. The storm had blown itself out overnight, leaving the coast washed clean beneath a pale golden sky. The waves that had raged for days now rolled in slow and steady, as if the sea itself had grown weary of violence. Daniel sat by the window with a cup of coffee, his daughter asleep upstairs. She had cried until exhaustion pulled her under her head, resting against the arm of the sofa. For years, Daniel had wondered if this day would ever come, the day when Claire would finally see the truth. He had feared it would take her being broken, humiliated, perhaps even ruined. And though her wedding lay in shambles, though her faith in Adrian had collapsed in a single night, she was still here. She had not disappeared with Adrian into the storm. She was under his roof, fragile but safe. Marcus arrived just after sunrise, his expression grim but purposeful. He placed a newspaper on the table. The headline stretched across the front page, Tech Entrepreneur Adrian Holt Exposed in Wedding Scandal. Beneath it, photographs of the half-finished villa, drenched guests fleeing the rain, and Adrian himself caught mid-shout, his composure stripped away. Word spread faster than we expected, Marcus said, sliding into a chair. The recordings, the testimonies, the vendors speaking out, it all came together at once. By the time the guests left the villa last night, half of them already knew the truth. This morning, the rest of the world does too. Daniel skimmed the article. It spoke of fraud, unpaid contracts, inflated invoices, investors demanding answers. Adrian had vanished into the storm, unreachable, his empire collapsing around him. The house of cards he had built for years had finally come down, and this time there would be no rebuilding. Good, Daniel said quietly. It is finished. Marcus shook his head. Not finished. Men like him rarely disappear completely. But this time he has no stage. no audience. He will be too busy running from creditors to charm anyone new. Daniel nodded. He did not care if Adrian resurfaced someday in another city, another scheme. What mattered was that Claire was free of him now. As if summoned by the thought, she appeared in the doorway, her hair tangled, her eyes swollen from tears. She looked younger than she had in years, her confidence stripped away, her voice soft. "Is it true everyone knows?" Daniel rose and guided her to the table. "It is true. He cannot hurt you anymore." She sat down slowly, her gaze fixed on the newspaper. Her lips trembled as she read the words as the reality sank in. Finally she whispered, "I feel like a fool." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "No, you were deceived. Adrian was a master of illusion. Many stronger, older, wiser people fell for his lies. But you see him now for what he is, and that is what matters." Tears welled in her eyes again. "I said such horrible things to you. I pushed you away. I blamed you for Mom. I believed every poisonous word he said." Daniel's voice broke with emotion, but his grip on her hand was steady. "I never stopped being your father, and I never stopped loving you. That is all that matters now." For a long while they sat in silence, the sound of the ocean filling the gaps between words. Marcus excused himself quietly, leaving them alone to begin the slow work of mending. Days passed. The scandal spread far beyond their town. Adrian's name became synonymous with fraud, his face plastered across screens as investigators dug into his past. The villa canceled the contract. The caterers demanded restitution. Former investors came forward in droves. It was the end of his carefully curated empire. For Claire, it was the end of a dream and the beginning of painful reckoning. She moved back into Daniel's home for a time, her once sharp edges softened by grief and regret. She spent hours walking along the beach where she had played as a child, staring out at the endless horizon. Some days she spoke little, but when she did, her words carried a new honesty. "I thought he loved me," she admitted one evening, her voice quiet, as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink into the waves. "But he loved what I represented. I was not his partner. I was his stage prop." Daniel squeezed her hand. "You are more than what he made you believe. You are strong, Claire. You will heal." And slowly she began to. Neighbors who had once whispered now came to the door with quiet words of support. Vendors who had pulled out sent notes of sympathy. Even the community that had once judged Daniel for refusing to pay now seemed to understand the truth. He was no longer the bitter old man in the shadows. He was the father who had stood firm against deception, who had refused to bend. For the first time in years, Daniel felt dignity settle on his shoulders like a cloak. He had faced humiliation, manipulation, and loss, but he had not given in. He had chosen truth, and it had saved his daughter. Weeks later, when the last of the scandal faded from the headlines, Daniel stood once more on the shore at dawn. The waves rolled in gently, the sky streaked with pink and gold. Beside him, Claire walked quietly, her arm linked with his. She rested her head against his shoulder, and for a moment he felt Emily's presence too, as if she walked with them in the soft light of morning. "Thank you," Claire whispered. Daniel looked out at the horizon, his voice steady. "We have survived the storm. Now it is time to begin again." And with the rising sun breaking through the clouds, father and daughter took their first steps toward a new chapter. Their bond mended their future, no longer bound by lies, but by truth. This story reminds us that love sometimes means standing firm even when the people we love do not understand. Daniel's strength lay not in money or power, but in his refusal to be broken, in his courage to expose lies, even at the risk of losing his daughter forever. In the end, truth may bring pain, but it also brings freedom. And sometimes the storms we fear most are the ones that clear the skies for new beginnings. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, truth, and redemption, please remember to like the video, share it with friends, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life.